Welcome to this workshop of the Rural Network. I am Patrizia Proietti of the Council for Agricultural Research and the Analysis of Farming Economies. You know that the CREA has always been present in the area of viticulture with prominent research efforts as well as dissemination and support to farms and companies. We've always operated in this sector, in other words. So we have policies that deal with research and support to regional administrations in the promotion of rural development plans. We're here today to talk about the contribution of the PEI-AGRI to innovation in the viticultural sector. So what the value added is. But what is the PEI-AGRI? I'm not sure whether you all are aware, but it's a new approach that was promoted by the European Union, a new approach to innovation, which understands innovation as the result of the interaction among several players and different bodies of knowledge. So it's a multi-player approach, multi-stakeholder approach where all the participants in the chain and links of different chains or sectors that may have an interest in such industry are understood as holders of knowledge and know-how that must be put at everybody's disposal in order to promote innovation. So this approach will move from a traditional model where innovation is produced by research and is disseminated through consulting to companies to a new approach, which is a bottom-up one and will therefore originate in companies and will develop in the form of a quest for a solution to a problem or a question that companies have that involves all players, all stakeholders, each with their own competencies, in the form of a partnership where everybody contributes his or her knowledge in the research of a solution to be made available to the company. So this session will discuss two things. First of all, we'll be discussing the relevance of the PEI-AGRI to the agricultural sector, while the second session or subsession will discuss the innovations developed by the work groups. My time is over. Be aware that after each of the meetings, there will be time for questions. I'll now leave the floor to my colleague Valentina Carta.
In questa prima parte.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Patrizia. During the first part of this roundtable, we'll introduce the interactive scheme that is typical of PEI-AGRI. Innovation is a key point for PEI-AGRI, and today we'll listen to experiences made in the agricultural sector and in the processing sector. And we also listen to other players that have been introduced thanks to the introduction of this working groups. First of all, we'll listen to an experience, a Equivoltare Consortium winery in Basilicata. And we'll give the floor to Mr. Donato Gentile. And I would like to ask him, how have you been involved? How was this interactive method implemented? And what value added do you retrieve from participation in these working groups? I would like to illustrate what the Equivolt Consortium is. This is the lead association for this project. 21 wineries, 4 organic farming companies, and it represents 50% of the Basilicata agricultural area. And we have the Divinosa winery, for which I'm in charge, accounting for 80% of Ianico of the area. The land is very different in terms of exposure, soil quality, And in our specific farm, we have 800 hectares on wine and 400 partners. This innovative tool is very important for us because the WebGIS runs on a smartphone application within which the various plots are included with all the vineyards, the type of soil, the analysis, water availability, graphs, all this data is included, and that's very important for wine makers because you can monitor vineyards for the whole cycle. And this is important in our case because some smaller wineries can actually control their production better. But Aglianico that we produce is one of the later species. It gets ripe some 50 days after the Prosecco, and managing vintage during such a short period is very important. I mean, if we have this application, that helps us a lot. One of the problems that we might encounter is that of disseminating this application among all partners. Having a strong participation is important. The more comprehensive the dissemination, the more valuable information we can get. Okay, so in the future you'll invest more in disseminating this application and involving your members. I would like to thank Mr. Gentile, who unfortunately has to leave us to take a plane. Thank you for your participation. After having listened to a representative of wineries, I'll give the floor to Chiarazzani, who is part of the Tenuta in Pernice farm of and he belongs to two working groups. What has been the way in which you've been involved within this partnership project, and what is the added value? The way in which I was involved dates back to a long time ago. My mother funded the company I work in the mid-80s. She was at the time growing rice, and when she arrived to Piacenza, hilly areas, she realized that there was not enough water for rice growing, and she saw that vines were an opportunity. So she went to the University of Sacro Cuore in Piacenza that had a very prestigious faculty of agronomy, and she was advised by the university, and she actually funded her company. So it is a family habit that we have. At the time, she was considered to be bizarre because it was believed that scholars are very good in theory but not in practice. That was the approach on our hills. And my mother was actually of another view, and she addressed the experts and the academics, and she realized that they can be very practical too. So it is the meeting point of 2 points. ITER Ms. Carla Scotti, this is the project on soil sustainability and preservation. Well, with regard to this, it dates back to some time again, because I had already collaborated with Professor Scotti for a project on the company zoning. What changed thanks to these two projects? Something changed for the better. Even if research was a key point for us. We were somehow lonely. We were not part of a project. We were not part of an organization. Whereas these working groups, these operating working groups, conveyed a project perspective, and they grouped together not only players coming from similar areas, but I also had the opportunity of meeting farmers from other parts around Piacenza. And this is very useful because a series of relationships are started which contribute to reflection. This does not only meet the needs of a company, but they help you to realize what are your needs. These projects are interesting because while you're studying something, you discover something else. You discover something that can be used differently and that can be useful for a different application. And this is extremely nice. I mean, I wouldn't say that this is part of a sort of distraction, not at all. Every single day, you really open up your mind and get richer. I would also like to add that personal and social availability of people and researchers is extremely important. And in Piacenza, we are very lucky because both ITER with Carla Scotti and her colleagues and all researchers, Professor Gatti, Professor Poni, etc., all of them are wonderful. And they really give us all necessary information. I mean, they don't just come and act, but they really inform us. I am involved. Well, I'm the owner of the farm, but I'm not the only one to be involved. The person who's in charge of this project in the vineyard, who gets the right machine that we need, for instance, the shred machine. Well, they're also involved. This is what has taken place through and thanks to this operating working groups that have been extremely useful for us in our farms.
Thank you so much, not just for this very positive experience, but also for exposing the value of the operating groups and the multi-stakeholder approach, which led to also an evolution in the innovation to be introduced into the companies. Let's hear from another farm, another estate, Pantano. We have Giorgio Pantano with us today. Can you tell us more about your experience? Well, I am the owner of an estate of 20 hectares approximately, where my brother and my wife also work. And so we're a small to medium estate. 4 or 5 hectares on average is the size of companies like our own. In my estate, I have experienced problems that I was looking for solutions for. What's the general problem of small to medium-sized estates in the Venetian area? Well, it is that companies that aim at producing quality products, you need to do manual work on your own. But this manual work is no longer compatible with the many hours you have to devote to office work and other activities. In other words, the situation is that you have to spray, do quality, prune, and then go to trainings and to meetings, etc. And you have to give up something. And sometimes you just think that it would be better to sell everything, to just transfer the whole thing to others. Now, the top-down model is that is such that actually, also in the Venetian area, we are creating companies, but actually what happens is that also during the harvest season, during the picking season, it is possible for companies like mine to bring 1,000 quintals of grapes on one single day thanks to technology. It means that the presses that I have in the winery will not be able to process it right away. In the past, when let's say 100 tons of grapes would make it to the winery, it would take a time frame of 5 to 10 days. So I asked myself, now, my company does it really have to follow this technological model whereby you needed to survive based on only economies of scale? I said to myself, no. So also based on my experience, and I am someone who from the countryside went to the city and then came back, and that's been 15 years ago. And so I went through the entire experience in 1982. I lived in Milan, and it was the period when we saw the first PC make it to Milan from the US. And so when we saw this little thing, having had the habit of big computers, we didn't expect much from it. But then the large computers died away. IBM even faced difficulties with its mainframes. So what happened? We thought of creating a different model and to introduce the robotization of vineyards, going from mechanization to robotization. In my company, to treat 1 meter, I need 50 minutes with an older tractor. Of course, it would be better to use 25 minutes. But if the tractor to do that costs 110,000 euros, and then the sprayer will cost me 40,000 in addition to that, and all the other machinery, that's a problem. And even if I could buy them, I'd have to spend all my time on board the tractor. But since I can't pay the tractor with my surface area, I'll also have to find another job. Does that make sense at all? So that's why we thought of robotization. We are now automating operations. By 2020, the robo will be active. It's a 40 HP robot, which is self-driven, and it will no longer require an operator. But it is an innovative technology in that it will not just be GPS operated, which is more or less the type of machinery that you find these days. Because this is not just a piece of equipment that goes out to the vineyards and then comes back. It's a new concept whereby on board are low-cost advanced technologies whereby when the machine arrives, it will take the machinery and drive it in the vineyard. The robot understands, is educated and understands how the vineyards are, where they are located and how they should be run. And from then on, we have accessories out in the field. So we have 3 partners and one that was already experienced in this respect. It's possible to have the farmer here and the machine there that drives down to zero all safety-related costs. So you are not running the risk of getting fines or sanctions because perhaps your workers don't have safety shoes that particular day. So to avoid the 330 euros in fines because you're not wearing the right respirator or the right pair of shoes, I'll allow the robot to take care of the vineyards and I'll stay in the office, and that's safe for everybody.
Avevo già in azienda un mezzo auto.
So we already had something that we had to build for ourselves, but then luckily the PSR, this sender, this call was subsidized, aggregating high competence and resources and combining the competencies of the machinery producer, a company that takes care of electronics and sensors. My estate, and I also had to welcome a university in our project. Unfortunately, I'm saying because that was very hard from a bureaucratic standpoint. It was a foreign university, the University of Malmö, because the technology whereby the robot is navigating in an agricultural estate, the technology is not available in Italy. You have to source it in Denmark, Nordic countries, the Netherlands. The closest university was Marborg.
C'è anche un partner estero, anche se ci sono stati problemi burocratici.
Grazie al dottor Pantano per la...
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Pantano, for your experience in the Eurovitis group. Not only was there a possibility to interact with different partners, not only in the Italian and foreign research world, but also other companies that could meet the specific needs that had originated from the company. We'll now see a new role that has been introduced thanks to the innovation partnership, the innovation broker. So I'm calling on Gianni Trioli, who is a partner with Vinidea of many operating groups at the national level, and who can give us a new perspective at the global level and a diversified one across regions where they have played a role as a facilitator, a new role called the facilitation broker.
When some people define me as an innovation broker, I tend to reply that Vinidea is an innovation broker without knowing it, because I heard this definition for the first time in Florence during a meeting that was organized by the Tuscany region, and it was not very long ago, and it was explained there what is the function of the innovation broker, and I'll try to sum up. Innovation brokers explores, scouts innovations all over the world, because an innovation is not something that is generated somewhere and is developed somewhere else. In some cases, once you transfer innovation from one point to another, you need to adapt it. That applies to most types of innovations. So you need to scout new technologies, new innovations. This is what the innovation broker does. So they contribute to imagine their application of their implementation tools in a certain area. They facilitate the creation of certain initiatives and sets up groups that can adapt this technology, and they sort of moderate groups. When I actually heard that list of features, I realized that I could be defined as an innovation broker. The innovation broker is a professional. If someone who's not always present, because in many cases there are some people who actually do a series of functions, but not all the ones that I've mentioned. And the role of the innovation broker is this: he or she is a facilitator. He is a sort of third party, and so he or she is not directly involved in the criticalities that were mentioned by the two representatives of the farms, because in some cases they are associations or consortiums. So, they're sort of third parties, experiences and difficulties that have been encountered when it comes to launching an operating working group. There are many difficulties because it is a new tool. It has been codified recently, and since it is a new tool, all regions have tried to interpret it as well as they could, but without any previous experience. So they're just starting, and some regions have not yet started to implement this tool. It is a new instrument. Some regions started ahead of the others, such as Tuscany and Emilia-Romagna, so they've actually already corrected the criticalities. 2 tenders were launched in Emilia-Romagna and Toscana, and every time a new one is launched, it's improved vis-à-vis the previous one. Well, innovation and knowledge is boundless. And therefore, the tenders, the calls for interest for operating working groups tend to attract stakeholders from the same area, farms, research centers, and sometimes they do it in a very determined way with a lot of resolve. So it is sometimes difficult to involve subjects that are not necessarily research centers. There are some stakeholders that have also focused on development. It's difficult to attract people and stakeholders from outside the region and from abroad, because there is a lot of red tape that is required. For Italian stakeholders, it is very difficult to ask foreign entities to produce all the documents that are necessary to set up this operating working group, especially when you deal with research centers that are very important. And very often, these are the ones that produce new knowledge and innovations. When you address a university in Belgium or in the Netherlands, and you invite them to be part of this operating working group, and you offer 20,000 euros, but they need to produce a series of documents in Italian, that becomes very difficult. So a considerable simplification would be necessary in order to have an involvement of some other subjects, some other players from abroad. And there is another difficulty that is involving the farms. So here we have 2 that are represented and that are particularly evolved. And they have very diverse experiences. They had experiences also in some other sectors, not only agricultural sectors, but there are not many of with these characteristics, and it's not easy because they have to commit themselves considerably with human and financial resources. In some cases, they can not actually benefit from reimbursements or repayment for the time that they actually spend in this activity. So there are many situations in which there are no employees, farms are small, and there is a single farmer who has to do everything in the company and outside the company, and it is difficult to involve farmers, even if they realize that it is very important for them to be part of this process in order to grow and share. But this is a major difficulty. So whenever regional tenders for any reason require a certain number of companies or a certain geographical distribution of companies in mountainous areas or protected areas, well, I can assure you that it is difficult to find not even 5 companies, 5 farms that are interested in joining the initiative and producing all the necessary documents. However, this is a very useful instrument, especially in Italy and Southern Europe more than Northern Europe. We are part of a Horizon project on the role of consultancy and advisory, and we see that our colleagues from Northern Europe have a completely different productive system, not only because they do not focus on wines, but because they have larger farms and the innovation brokers have been there for years, whereas we have small farms, and farmers in some cases have farming as a second job because they cannot actually survive on farming, and those farms, once they have organized themselves, will find that this instrument is very important, especially to promote innovation. And by innovation, we mean something that can have a practical application. Thank you. Thank you. You've also mentioned some criticalities that could actually be improved in the future for EIP-AGRI. So we should have a further simplification so as to promote participation of farms, even if somehow some solutions have already been found. Well, Mr. Daniel Bondesan from the Edmach Foundation, please tell us how research has changed and evolved in order to respond to this interactive approach. What has been the evolution within the research sector? Good afternoon. Well, I perfectly agree with what the previous speaker has just said, because research has to take the needs of farms into consideration even more, especially when it comes to developing local areas, and research institutes should try and restore those problems that are particularly felt by farmers. I'm part of the Mach Foundation, so I work in Trentino. But we were also involved by the autonomous province of Bolzan, because some problems are common, and producers of both the Alto Adige region and of the Trentino region can actually interact among themselves and also with research centers. This is possible also thanks to some bridges. I will say that in Trentino and Alto Adige are present. Those are some bridges through which research that sometimes is far away from the local reality can actually get in contact with the producers, and I'm referring to producers' organization, agricultural trade unions, and technical assistance representatives. All those stakeholders are representatives of the agricultural world. They hold the responsibility, and they feel it is their duty to require tangible results from researchers. One example, in the project I'm working on, we started with certain ideas that we had, certain proposals that we wanted to actually make to producers, but after discussing with producers, we changed our course, we changed our approach in order to meet their needs, the needs of the productive world. And this enables us to draft a list of priorities. I would say that in order to solve problems, this ongoing dialogue is key. It can take place through very simple routes. For instance, we used simple questionnaires, and we tried to involve a few hundreds farmers in order to try and have their responses about priorities and requests. In agriculture in general, in the fruit sector and in the vine sector, farmers want to have tangible answers and solutions, and this can happen also through dissemination. We need to take part in updating courses that very often are just a repetition of what we already know. So farmers tend to have the impression that they're wasting their time, but through these initiatives, the research side can actually enrich this part and actually contribute with innovations and contribute to the development of the agricultural sector.
I thank all participants in the roundtable for their very precious contribution. Thank you for sharing with us your vision about the interaction model, and the floor goes to Simona Cristiano, who will address us on synergies between operational groups and research work at European level.
Grazie. Grazie.
Thank you. My name is Simona Cristiana, and I am the Simona that Gianni was mentioning earlier on, asking whether I was here or not. I kindly invite the speakers to join us here on stage. Cristina Micheloni, well, I thought you were not here. Anyway, thank you very much for the round table. Because you testify to the good work done. The second part of the round table aims at considering the practical applications. You see, we wanted to have a synergetic approach between and among different instruments of the agricultural policy in Europe. Possibly this synergy was sort of neglected, and it is true, it was a new instrument, and people focused more on the interaction itself within partnerships, which could act as bridging elements between production and research. Anyway, in our part of the round table, we wanted to understand about the practical implications.
Cristina Micheloni, che ha partecipato come
We talk about this together with Mrs. Micheloni, who is a coordinating expert for the focus group of productivity and sustainability in agriculture, European Partnership for Innovation. So you are the expert here, and the aim was that of networking and grouping information and knowledge in Europe. So my question to you is, given your capacity, how did you act and serve as a bridge between this system of European research, and then what about the role that you performed, not only as a partner in European partners, but in general? Well, first and foremost, the first focus group was about organic farming. So what was interesting was that there was not one system already established for the work of focus groups. So it was work in progress. So this entailed difficulties. At the same time, it was interesting because we could experiment with things. After 3 years, I coordinated the group on IPM in agriculture, where there was a consolidated structure. There was a manual about focus groups and how they were. As for the very first experience, I must say that there was a lot of passion because, you see, very few people did research in the field of organic farming until a few years ago, and many organic farmers acted as researchers. That entailed that we had a group of 20 experts, and OK-Net Arable was the outcome of this, which was a platform to exchange information and knowledge about arable land, organic farming, and so on and so forth. This led to a series of initiatives in Italy and also in other countries. I'm particularly knowledgeable about what happened in Friuli. But anyway, over the course of a few years, because time, in a way, flees, and so years have elapsed, and the problem is bureaucracy. Then it was impossible to synchronize, in a way, the calls. The first group was done in 2015. Then the calls for the operational groups were issued much later. In the meantime, we had done a beautiful report about the state of the art, and it was already old. Then the second experience I made came a bit too late, in a way, meaning that it was late for Horizon 2020 calls because we had made the focus groups and we want to participate in the calls for Horizon, and we also had worked for the regions. So the logic was perfect, but then the various agendas entailed that timing was not perfect and bureaucracy also was an extra burden. Anyway, I would say that the operational groups of PEI-AGRI were a turning point in order to make research in a useful way. I agree with what was said by the previous speaker. Should we manage to make red tape less cumbersome, less heavy, then we would really achieve a lot. We would end up in an ideal situation. Actually, I had to ask some agricultural farmers not to stop cooperating due to the bureaucracy. Well, you participate in major research projects at European level. You have several in progress, as a matter of fact. So how do you transfer that research to the partners that you have in the operational groups? Well, I must say that one of the innovations that we devised, taking it from the United States, was the usage of roller crimper for local farming, being maize and soy. And then we thought of transferring that to horticulture. We did that with a working group in Friuli with OK-Net Arable. We built something new, which went back to previous experience, but which was physically different because we involved a machine builder from Piedmont, Now we have yet another participant from Slovenia because we wanted to adapt that for horticulture. And many of the farms that we work with have arable land and also do horticulture. So the fact that you have to rotate crops due to various reasons in farming, and since oftentimes farms are small-sized, we need to try and optimize expenses and also the fleet of machines. So this is what we did. Well, the same question goes to Niccolò Biasi, who is a part of Oiscelli group, and you are an agronomist. So you act as a consultant within the company, and there you also have people who participated in European projects. So what can you tell us? How did you experience these parts of the work, which is bridging the gap between research and practical application at European level, really? Well, honestly, that was the first time I participated in an active way in an operational group. I was impressed, positively impressed, by the fact that when you bring together different partners, farms, ISVEA, and universities, when you have people sitting at the same table, then people are forced to find a way to speak to each other. Oftentimes, the problem is that everybody performs their own role. Universities do research, scientific research, and they get to results that are not understood by the farms, by the producers, because they do a different job. They have a different job, as if they spoke two different languages. And here at Enno Forum too, we had many interesting contributions, and many also had a practical side to them. Some of them were particularly complex and difficult. It was difficult for me to fully understand things. I try and put myself in the shoes of a farm owner. What would the farm owner understand? So bringing together around the same table different entities and forcing them to speak was very valuable. ISVEA here acted as a bridge, acted as an intermediary in a way, a mediator. So research would pinpoint a number of interesting elements that should be applied in order to improve the shelf life of white wines from Umbria. And then there was an entity that forced a sort of implementation of that. That was very important. You see, next year we will start going for industrial vinification, which means that we will have protocols that, of course, farms must correctly understand. Businesses should understand why we do these things, what is the ultimate goal. If that does not happen, then it is very, very difficult to be able to involve people in a positive way. If people are there simply because they have to, and they are not involved, and they do not understand the objective of research and the reason why we joined efforts, then it is very difficult to have people work in a nice way because they are not engaged, they are not involved. So it was very important to have an operating group.
Conti avete fatto alla fine un minimo di sinergia si è trovata, dobbiamo saperla soltanto mettere in evidenza, scovarla in qualche modo, ma
Well, from what you've said, it is obvious that synergy exists in these operating groups at the level of PEI-AGRI. Well, this cooperation, the synergy is there. Now, the point of view of administrations. This is what we're asking. What is your point of view? How could administrations somehow facilitate this further complementarity between European research and the stakeholders and players of innovation at the territorial and local level. Not all can take part in research, but they certainly can benefit from research. So what are your proposals, especially for the next period when EIP-AGRI will be further developed? Well, Alessandro Giamini from the Tuscany region takes part in some of these 2020 European research projects. How do you plan to transfer the result of your research to the local level? Thank you, Simona. I would like, first of all, to recall what Gianni Trioli said at the opening of this edition of InnoForum. In his first slide, there was a word, innovation, and he reiterated even today that innovation is absolutely key. Innovation is the very basis, is the very focus. I mean, it is the fuel that we need in order to go ahead. During these days, many projects were mentioned, many of them within the Horizon 2020. Then we also listened to some presentations about live projects. I mean, we are talking about EU funds, and we need to find a synergy among all those funds, as companies have also required. When we talk about these groups, we refer to 16.2, which of course deals with cooperation. Working together is what is needed. The main action is that of creating networks, networking, and all projects should be multi-stakeholders. We have to find multi-stakeholders projects where the players who take part in the project must have their own specificity, their own competencies, and they're all on an equal footing. So the initiative should not be taken by researchers who try to involve farmers, but farmers should sit on those groups on the same footing. What is AgriFin? AgriFin is a project that was completed last year, and Ms. Patrizia Proietti also showed a slide about innovation and how is an innovation taking place. It is no longer linear now, it is circular, and this circularity means that all stakeholders participate in order to assess the situation in which we are and decide whether we should go back or go forward. At the very basis of the AgriSpin project, there was the purpose of trying to find an adequate technology in order to reduce the gap between innovation and tangible applications. And as Gianni said, we should also try and improve innovation. I do not want to reiterate the same innovation and keep it locally. I can draw inspiration from what I see in another sector. I can borrow what I see in another sector. I can I can carry out tests in other areas. So, I mean, dissemination of knowledge is absolutely key. The European Commission, with the funds, and through EIP-AGRI, plays an important role. Well, AGRI-SPIN used cross visits quite extensively. Cross visits are carried out not only to visit a company and get to know success cases in the innovation sector, but the aim is that of trying to understand how the innovation was generated, how it was enhanced, in order to exchange experiences and try to improve. I would like to conclude by saying that what really matters is the generation of synergies, creating synergies among the various people, the various projects, and the various funds. Within the PSR, we have cooperation and training. Those are the 2 points. Precision farming. We provide companies with machines that are autonomous, but sometimes, well, very often farmers are not autonomous and they need to have other people to get instructions. So my wish is that of having multi-measure projects and create synergies with other funds that the European Commission puts at our disposal. Yes, of course, there is this bridging role in order to create an enabling environment so that at a local level these initiatives can actually be implemented. Alessandra Gemmiti, the DG Agriculture from Tuscany, and Alberto Zanoni, same function for Veneto region. The question is this: how can we actually foster this enabling environment for research and local development? First of all, I would like to say that this first approach for this new system within innovation, well, this is a first approach that is still an experiment. It is an experimental approach. We needed to find a way for the productive system and the research and, sector to try and understand each other and start collaborating together. This has been a success. Paradoxically, you know, for innovation brokery, 2 out of 3 projects continued. There was a project that was submitted for measure number 16, but there was another one that continued its activity with the project on the smart specialization strategy, which is good. But the fact that there is only one that has been able to achieve this result, or that has anyway tried to get benefit from another fund, which gives financing for local research and applications, means that we should do more about this. At a regional level, and I'm referring to my region in the PSR, we try to focus on simplification, and I mean, we focus on those funds that could be paid in an easier and more rapid way. So we try to focus on those funds rather than on the others. What have we done? We thought that in the assessment of the projects that were submitted, and 53 projects were submitted in Veneto during the 2 calls, 14 for viticulture, we noticed that there was a positive trend. There was an improvement if we consider projects submitted during the first tender and during the second one, both in terms of the role played by the partners, especially producers and farmers, and also in terms of focused objectives or targeted objectives, because the projects became more effective, more tangible, more concrete. And another element that we've noticed is that this type of projects focused on productive systems, not only isolated producers, but there were sort of overarching projects, and these are the ones that in this sector, in the sector of vines and vineyards, well, are the ones that enable results to be disseminated in the best possible way within the local area, because the reference will be, the cooperative with 500 plus members and not just 2 to 3 farmers. And we also tried to introduce some factors that could be complementary among the projects that were presented by the operating groups and other projects or other topics that were identified for other programs. And in this case, we actually included into the selection criteria some criteria related to complementarity of those projects that are submitted in the operating groups vis-à-vis the objectives of other programs. So we actually gave value or importance to this possible interaction or synergy. And if some partners who took part in the operating group also took part in other programs, they were actually assessed more favorably. And the same applies to funding of those projects. For this first round, I would say that we've actually found a method. We are implementing this method to all our assessment and evaluation activities. When it comes to proposing innovations, we set up a task force for the primary sector, where you find not only the representatives of professional organizations and producers' organizations, but you also have representatives of research and experimentation, as well as practitioners and other stakeholders in the world of work or in some environmental sectors. And this is a task force. And our colleagues in Brussels actually contribute with the various innovations that are part of the discussion. After this discussion, some further groups can be set up. And these are the reference groups when it comes to having contacts with Brussels and applying for funds. The same thing has been applied for the wine sector, with a task force that concerns all aspects to ensure sustainability. in this sector, and research and experimentation, but also training and dissemination are important points. And there you find representatives of professional organizations as well as civil society organizations and research institutes are also represented. And the objective is that of sharing some criticalities as well as finding the way to carry out some activities in the research and dissemination sectors that can be suitable.
Le amministrazioni stiano in qualche modo riuscendo anche.
Well, I think that administrations and governing bodies are trying to find a way so as to combine the two aspects of research and innovation territorial level in a better way. I thank participants in the roundtable that has just been finished, and I invite the speakers of the next roundtable to join us here on stage. Thank you.
Sì, buonasera. Allora, buonasera a tutti. Iniziamo adesso il terzo momento.
Good afternoon. This is the beginning of our round table. Please let me tell you first and foremost that what we have seen until now is very interesting, and in a way it gives me so much energy because I'm accumulating positive experiences about what has been done so far at national and international level. So actually I really perceive the value added of our work here.
Questa tavola rotonda passiamo ad indagare, a dialogare.
Now, with our round table, we further investigate yet another very important aspect of the interactive process of EIP-AGRI, which is that of disseminating knowledge and information. And this is what we talk about with our guests. My first question pertains to the understanding of the methods, instruments, and experiences can be narrated, so to say, in the wine-making and vine-growing sector. What is happening in Italy today? How do we communicate and disseminate that? We talk about this with Alessandra Biondi, who is a journalist and an agronomist.
Parlo della mia esperienza, quindi non ho mai.
I would like to tell you about my experience. Actually, I have never been part of an operating group, but I spoke about operating groups often. What I noticed is that I could reflect upon the way by which I had found information about the operating groups. I had found information in a sort of random way. Information about projects was given, and that is also the task of journalists to provide this information, and we have to try and find information. That is part of our job. This is what I meant. But oftentimes there are difficulties in finding the right piece of information, finding the right person to ask, and then disseminate the experiences. Well, from my viewpoint, these experiences are good, nice experiences, and they convey with them a transfer of innovation if addressed to experts and operators, but in general they can also change the perception of farming on the part of the public at large. What about the means that we can deploy, therefore, so as to make this experience known? Well, I would say that we have plenty of means. We will have to pick the right ones depending on the target group. We range from traditional means, which is the press in general, and there you have press releases, So I read yesterday that there are approximately 200 operating groups, but it's not so that newspaper offices received 200 press releases. So evidently, it is not so that the mass media, the general mass media, receive information. It is the technical press that receives, in general, more information about the operating groups. Indeed, this is something that we could improve. Then there can also be a press office. Then there are journals, magazines, so the social media and the web. Of course, all this has to occur in a very highly professional way. It might happen that you open a website, you visit it, and you find no information, or you find very little on Facebook. So you have to find the right means for the right piece of information. Facebook can be important, along with additional social media, to tell about the people who participate in things, but you can't publish results of your research on Facebook. And yet Facebook is useful in, for instance, telling that you are doing something, that the project is existing. It is also helpful in giving this feeling of a movement, of something going on. And this applies, I would say, especially to wine growing and wine making. So the message is that we have to pay a lot of attention to transferring information, because by means of information and many means, we manage to convey information about what is going on. You said that you were looking here and there to find information. Did you manage to find special information or something that you think it is worth telling? You said earlier on that you had to look here and there to retrieve information. This is not what I meant. I'm sorry. Apparently, I was not clear enough. Information is there and can be retrieved. What I meant is that you have to go and look for it. It's not so that you do not find information. So you asked me what I found. And what I told then as a consequence, once in a while I told about projects that took place last week. I spoke to Dr. Pantano about the Rovitis and PV sensing projects in the Veneto region. So everything which has to do with IoT in the vineyard is of special interest and discovered extensively. And oftentimes IoT applied to other sectors, including olive growing and oil making, needs to be further investigated. The same goes for what has been said about the usage of ultrasound to send away deers and other animals. So how can we spread innovation in the wine growing and wine making and wine growing sector? Carla Scotti will take the floor now. She's from an operating group in Emilia.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I'd like to say first and foremost that ours is not a communication and dissemination company. We're soil experts. That's why for the past 30 years we've been studying it. Now it's very fashionable to talk about soil, but we've had to work hard to communicate and disseminate about soil information so that this would become a tool and a form of knowledge for growers. We're not just working for agriculture, we are also the leaders, project leaders for other working groups in Emilia-Romagna where we operate. And when we do work in an operating group, we are very keen on having the participatory approach implemented. So we want to involve, in this case, farmers and growers who are who live in estates with specific geopedological characteristics. This methodology is addressed to partners and outside the partnership, which is embedded in the operating group. What's important for us is that our communications plan develops, unfolds simultaneously with the project, while with the previous regional legislation or development plans, communications would take place later about the results obtained. But actually, we start with a communications plan right away. As soon as the project begins, we start disseminating, allowing the growers to speak about their experiences and expectations. So it's a very down-to-earth communication. We use rural radios to do that, so as to voice the concerns of the farmers, the producers who work with us. So we have a local radio in the rural area. We recorded interviews and we put them also on QR codes using postcards and posters to so that people can seize the QR code, capture the QR code, and listen to these real-life stories, because there's an interest that needs to capitalize on the agricultural world. And then we also have invented the buses, the storytelling buses, that tell stories about innovation. So we travel, we drive around carrying researchers, farmers, and also public institutions, because when you talk about innovation you need and research, you need to involve the institutions that then will regulate the farmers' work. And we drive them around in buses, and the buses will discuss the topic of the day, visiting estates and farms in different areas. With whom we work. Another important dissemination tool are the demos, demo sites. We've heard about a former farmer who said that they have a demo site that's very important, where various soil management techniques are demonstrated and displayed. And, you know, seeing things directly out in the fields is essential to people who are researchers and institutions and other farmers. We also use mapping tools to explain how the data that come from our projects could be put to best use to expand the benefits. And I'll stop here. Okay, let's look at a different aspect, which is also important in PEI-AGRI, which is the use of tools for granting interaction within the operating group and outside it. Let's review the tools and the experiences, especially the digital tools used by the operating groups, operating work groups. So we're going to discuss this with a spin-off, Horta, Costanza Frevori. This is a partner of the Venetian operating group. Thank you. While I was waiting to speak, I was sort of planning what I wanted to say, but then listening to the two previous speakers, I had to revise everything and replan everything. And that for a good reason. Let me begin from the end. What would have been originally the end of my discussion, of my speech? The tools that I'm going to tell you about can also be communications tools in all respects. To begin with, I'll explain what Horta is. It's a spin-off of the Università Cattolica of Piacenza, and because it's a spin-off, it is geared to ensure communications, circulation, and popularization. So that is part of our DNA, just like technology transfer. So the purpose of making research something that can be directly used by the final users. Now, how do we do that? We do so by developing DSSs, decision support systems. In the framework of these DSSs and their development, Horta became part of an operating group called BODI, sponsored by the Venetian Development Plan, Rural Development Plan, targeting Treviso, Vicenza, and Belluno and other partners to develop a specific tool to support the decision-making in order to more rationally protect vineyard crops. Now, DSSs are web services that essentially integrate forecasting modeling, and that is the part of university research, with on-field activities such as weather monitoring, weather history, and what is going to also happen, so weather forecasts, and then process that, transforming it into an expert system that is capable of telling the growers that in the next, let's say, 10 days, there might be a risk of developing such and such disease in the vineyards. So that encourages the growers to pay more attention to their plots and take action only if actually necessary, if truly necessary. So here's a twofold vision of the dissemination function of these systems. Actually, it's a three-pronged one, to be honest. First of all, having DSSs that you make at the grower's disposal. And these systems are easy to use because they were used in order to make complex things as simple. So putting them at the disposal of the growers means also training the growers, giving them extra weapons in their arm chest, and also helping them develop crop protection mechanisms. Here at Enu Forum, I have displayed a poster that tells how Horta developed a forecast model for botrytis, which has changed entirely the way in which people would protect their crops from botrytis, because it has taken a different approach. So all this knowledge is transferred to research, which is then put at the disposal of the growers. BODI was also, so this PEI-AGRI was also an opportunity to often talk to the farmers and final users, to talk to them and to hear from them. BODI is also a sustainability tool with the DSS, so that agrochemicals are only used where needed and when needed, while we know that, especially in recent years, viticulture has often been criticized for its widespread use of agrochemicals, and often the growers have been in contrast with the general population. So that's a way to demonstrate that sustainability is possible and that it can be very useful to use these systems in that respect too. There was a third point, but I can't remember which one it was. That's the prong. But anyway, the spin-off Horta has a payoff that I just simply love, which is from research to field. So to go from research to field, you need to communicate research to the field, and so communications is essential. So now I'll ask the same question to Giovanni Bigot of the company called Perlev, of the operating group Smart Meteor. What are the digital tools at the disposal of the viticultural sector?
Presenti sono.
Good afternoon, I'm Giovanni Bigot. I'm an agronomist from Friuli, and I am the director of the Società per le Uve, and our focus is crop management. In other words, staying in the vineyards to grow better and obtain the best possible quality in our wines. In the framework of this, and with an eye to specialization, crop protection is key. Without sound grapes, no great wines can be made. And in the past 20 years, I've always been very focused in my work in the vineyards on the need to develop tools that would support me in recording what I could see out in the vineyards. So little by little, I understood that IT could help. And so I started with palm tops, PDAs initially, then I had to yield to an app. And so I created an app which is called For Grapes, which is downloadable. And that I think, or at least in my opinion, is the most specialized in vineyard observations. It allows me to monitor and collect information in the fastest way, that is, with a high quality level for the data. Because in order to categorize the symptoms, I have used the European standards for data collection. So in the past 3 years, I have collected 35 million plus units of data. I have used this tool in the Smart Meteo operating group that I'm a partner of. This group involves many stakeholders in Umbria. I personally dealt with the organization of the monitoring network in the vineyards with the assistance of the young people who collect information in the vineyards from approximately 50 different companies scattered around the territory of Umbria. The companies themselves and the partners who are interested through this app can also display the information in real time. So someone will watch and someone else will read the data. So when you see data collected in the vineyard, you're also encouraged to provide data in turn. And so that is enriching the system. The system has automatic alert levels. In the past few days, it often rang for downy mildew in Bevagna, Torgiano or Montefalco. And so that raised an alert for people and for people living around these vineyards, but also from people who are in the vineyards on an everyday basis. So the risk is calculated by the model, and out in the field, I have a picture of what's there. I don't think I could ever assess the situation to think of crop protection without being out in the vineyard. Like we can't adjust the kilos of copper in organic unless I assess my risk carefully. So I have to have a very viable assessment of what's going on in my vineyard and in my neighbor's vineyard through the app. Where I can share data. Data sharing is made possible among different users depending on your level of access. You can create your own private network, personal network, public network with these systems. This made it possible as part of the work of this operating group to make crop protection possible based on monitoring and forecasting. We also use Hortas and VitaNet models in the same project, and this led to the availability of weekly information to an entire region, which didn't exist before. So, so far, an excellent result, I would say.
Thank you. This is very important information. That we saw that in several regions and in several operating groups, you are testing also new digital instruments and means to disseminate information also in the winemaking and vine growing area. Thank you. It was very interesting. That is the end of this round table. It is very interesting to notice that in operating groups, you really create many new approaches. I invite Velasco, director of CREA, to join me here on stage. He will chair the next round table about innovations made by operating groups. We will have 6 presentations of by the operating groups with their technological innovations. And I ask Sergio Desco to come on stage too for their presentation from EIP-AGRI service point. So in the meantime, I would like to ask people whether they have questions about the roundtable so far. If you want to use this minute to ask a question, you can ask questions. You have to raise your hand. Christina has a question. We can't hear in the booth the question. We hear several voices. With reference to the rural network and CREA, you see, yesterday evening we spoke about this with Alessandra Gelmiti. We had an instrument until the previous programming period where we have Grundtvig, Leonardo, Erasmus, the former being an easy instrument, a small one, a lean one, and it was a very easy measure. It was 25,000 euro that you could use to bring farmers to elsewhere to see things. We used that for years also with Vinidea in the years, I would say, 2014, 15 and onwards. It was a small project with a very big impact. So they were ideal, and yet in the new programming period for lifelong learning programs, we don't find them. Try and ask for them again. I myself have written to everybody I could about this. We would like to have an Erasmus program for farmers and for advisors. That would be a wonderful instrument, and yet it is an individual program for individual entities, I mean people. While this was collective, you would put together a group of farmers and visit a place, see something, and they really had an impact. Thank you for saying so. Thank you. We agree. Actually, in Measure 1, in the programming period, we had exchanges for businesses, for farms. Unfortunately, it was not that exploited. It was too early, perhaps. Possibly in the next programming period, we will find a way to have a better management of exchanges between companies and businesses and farms. So, well, let's hope so. Anybody else wishing to take the floor and make a comment or ask a question? I understand that it is late. So let's move on. And the floor goes to Sergei Yudesco, a EIP-AGRI service point. He will present results to us about the 2015 effort that was mentioned earlier on. You have the floor, and then we will have the next speakers. Thank you.
Thanks a lot for the invitation. It is really a pleasure to be here and to present you the results of the EIP-AGRI focus group on viticulture, pests and diseases. I have to mention that Christina, who spoke earlier, was the coordinating expert of this focus group. And I'm a bit humble in presenting this because she is really the big expert in this field. But first, just a few words. So I'm working for the European network of the European Innovation Partnership for Agriculture. I will not go into details again about what EIP-AGRI is because many of the speakers before me already mentioned that. Yeah. So as you know, EIP-AGRI functions with 3 pillars. The first one is the rural development policy, where it is possible to finance the operational groups. We know that in Italy, in the various regions of Italy, there are already many operational groups ongoing. I can tell you that at European level, there are now more than 1,000 operational groups active, and approximately 50 of them are dealing with issues related to viticulture and winemaking. Then the second pillar is, of course, the Horizon 2020 research policy. In the future, we will talk about Horizon Europe. You know that in this period there were very big financial allocation for this policy, and in the future this will only increase in the future programming period. And finally, the third pillar of EIP-AGRI is the European network, and that in the European network we are trying to bring together as good as we possibly can farmers, but also researchers, advisors, innovation brokers from all over Europe, and facilitating their cooperation, and why not creating bridges for future projects and so on. And one of the activities we have at the European network is the so-called focus groups. And these focus groups are groups of 20 experts, including farmers, as I said, and researchers working together, but also other specialists in the field. So in this case, we also had, for example, plant protection specialists or advisors that are working closely with farmers. So this group of 20 experts is meeting 2 times over the course of 1 year, and they are discussing a very specific topic. So in this case, in the case of this focus group, the topic was diseases and pests in viticulture and how best to address them. But there were also various ramifications of the results, I would say. So I will... First, for example, one ramification is the so-called functional biodiversity and the role that functional biodiversity can play in a good management of the vineyard from the point of view of preventing pests and diseases. So some conclusions under the functional biodiversity were that we need a better understanding of the plant-pathogen interaction and a better understanding of how functional biodiversity works in general, and specifically considering the effects of climate change. Also that we need more knowledge on agronomic practices contributing to resilience and good biodiversity. And the group also identified some steps to take, and the first one is to promote the advantages of a balance between the vineyard and the agro-ecosystem, and also to disseminate and promote the benefits of choosing local varieties as a tool to preserve biodiversity, but also to map the pests and diseases across Europe and to monitor their spread and better understand their cycles and factors affecting their development, and to create a good balance in the farm and the area between the vineyards, meaning by means of other crop and other ecological means. Then the group also worked and produced some, I would call them some fact sheets for each pest and disease, well, not for all of them, but for the main ones that we encounter in Europe. So here I'm just giving some examples from the report. And for example, this is for the downy mildew disease. And what is nice about these fact sheets is that they try to describe, for example, where this disease is met and on which type of soils it appears. So here you can see compacted and wet soils, and also what are the conditions, the climatic and environmental conditions that facilitate the appearance of this disease. For instance, high humidity conditions or the wrong vineyard orientation, low ventilation, and so on. And then the group made a series of recommendations on how this disease can be tackled, can be addressed. So just to give an example, the use of tolerant varieties and clones, or balanced fertilization with reduced nitrogen to avoid excessive vigor and canopy development, and so on. So this is just the example for the downy mildew. The same for instance, for the powdery mildew disease, Botrytis cinerea. And in a similar way, it has been done for all most encountered diseases, and the same for pest. Just to give some examples here, the grapevine moths, for instance, and it's in the same format. So what are the conditions that favor the appearance, and what can be done about it by the wine growers? Also for mites and so on. I just included some examples. There is also a chapter on with recommendations regarding the influence of climate change on vineyard pests and diseases, and it has been concluded that the overall forecast for climate change is an increase of incidence of pests and diseases in viticulture, a change of pest species causing various problematic situations, a change in the biological cycles of pests and diseases and making them more difficult to control in the future, as well as an increased difficulty in forecasting due to extreme variation in climatic conditions, and consequently in the wine growth and development of pests and diseases. Then there are also practical examples of temperature change effects which are already visible, but I will not go into details. If you are interested, you can find them here in the report. And in terms of overall recommendations, the group proposed ideas for local innovation projects such as operational groups, also to address the impact of climate change, to enhance the biodiversity in vineyards, and to make proper use of cover crops, for instance, how to better use locally adapted varieties and heterogeneous planting materials, but also IPM practices and precision viticulture practices. Also for the grape trunk disease management. In terms of, so this was in terms of innovative projects. In terms of research needs, to increase the health in planting materials, to better downscale the principles of IPM and precision viticulture, and other strategies regarding the control of powdery mildew or the role of organic matter and soil fertility on plant health, the effects of climate change, and the main, also better understanding what are the main factors of wine decline. And not to forget also to research and develop strategies to better manage the grape wine trunk diseases. Strategies that can be incorporated in overall vineyard management strategies. I will now present also, because the group also gathered a full and comprehensive list of relevant research and ongoing research projects. So there are, you can find here, it's a great resource, I think. It really covers, I think, all research, almost all research done at European level in the recent years. So it is quite a long and exhaustive list. But I just wanted to put it here for you to be aware that this exists in this report, and you can consult it if you are interested, of course. So I would like to close by I want to hope that I raised your interest on this operational group, on this focus groups which are organized by the European network. And hopefully, if in the future we will have another focus group dealing with viticulture and winemaking, why not apply if you have an interest on that, and we will be happy to work with you at European level together with experts from other countries. Thank you.
Bene, brevemente in italiano, ritorno all'italiano.
So I will go back to Italian, and then the Portuguese guests will speak English. So I thank colleagues from the Rural Network for organizing this beautiful event. I would like to use as little time as possible in order to make room for the various contributions, and simply tell you that what I liked most was the fact that several barriers have been brought down. 20 years ago or something, we worked in silos in the industry, in the universities, and in the political world, and in administrations. So our dear friend underlined the fact that these new instruments developed a method, especially in the Veneto region, but also in all the other Italian regions, which has helped work in an extremely synergetic way, including all the sectors that I mentioned earlier on, under the coordination of possibly the political world. So this entails that to date we have the instruments we need to work in a sustainable way in farming and in viticulture. We have working tables. We have one tomorrow morning as well, because we want always to be active, you see. And the fact that we developed this method and brought down these barriers is really comforting. I heard what Professor Micheloni said about useful research. I listened carefully. You are right. You shouldn't reinvent what others have already invented. So if you do so, you fail. If you're poorly structured, you fail. Research has to be useful. Basic research, which is perhaps considered to be a bit distant from production and industry, is very useful, because then applied research follows suit. So we should talk about useful applied research that brings to the operators the outcomes of the efforts made by the academic world. Now we have incredible instruments and tools and means, and we are stimulated to use them. You see, I focused on technology transfer because I'm convinced that you need to have a practical repercussion. Giovanni Nigro will present to us one operational group from Emilia-Romagna. You have the floor, Giovanni. Thank you, Riccardo. Thank you. It is no longer a crowded group. Well, we are on social networks anyway, so actually there are so many people following what we say right now. So I will present an operational group that was set up in 2016 within the framework of the first call issued by the Emilia-Romagna region. It is an operational group which at the time already was asked for by producers in Emilia-Romagna, supported by them. Let me tell you that in previous roundtables, people really mentioned the need for synergy and for a creation of an interface between research and production. CRPV was set up in Emilia-Romagna for this very reason. We do not have a farming development agency in our region, and CRPV, which is one of the two centers, performed the role of what the agency would do. Actually, the major organizations of producers in Emilia-Romagna set up this center, and so CRPV, this center, listens to requests for research and innovation coming from producers, makes a critical analysis and examines and considers who could make the research and address the problem in terms of scientific partners. We now have a network so that we are very timely in putting forward solutions for our producer partners. I would like to make an example. The members of the winemaking sector, Arcevico, Rionite, and other producers, smaller ones, that make out 80% of the sector in our region. And they act as reference. So thanks to this constant exchange of information with the technical operators that work for these producers, we know what is asked for and try and meet the requests. In 2016, people talked a lot about the need to find answers to counter climate change and the effect of climate change in the past 20 years. So the operational group focused on climate change and vine growing and winemaking. It groups together entities such as those that I mentioned earlier on that are very important, such as Gruppo Cevico, Cantina Sociale di San Martino, Cantine Riunite, CIV. These are actual members. Then we have research centers, which is our Vegetable Production Research Center, CRPV, Astra, Bologna University, Piacenza University, and Modena Reggio University. Then we have associate partners, 2 farms. They are sort of satellite members, because you understand that we work with cooperative groups of 6,000 members or so. So our activity has an impact on the entire production base. The responsible person for the plan is myself. Then we have scientific experts, and we have also operational units that are involved, which are listed there for the plan. It is Astra, Cantina Riunite, Terra Cevico, and all the names that you see on the slide. And so we have, in addition to the names on the slide of the units that actually performed the tests, we also have University of Bologna, Piacenza, and the other universities and centers I mentioned earlier on. I wanted to repeat the names because they gave a very important contribution to the project. Where did we start from? Here I summarized what happened in the past 20 years. And this is also a preview of what will happen. Here you have 2 climate areas above the red line. It has been evidenced that change has occurred in terms of an increase by 0.5 degrees centigrade of temperature in the past 20 years, and then an increase in precipitation, rain and snow and hail. Solar radiation is decreasing, solar radiation is decreasing, while on the other side we have 1.5 degrees, less rain and more solar radiation. What does this entail? What is it that we could ascertain in our area of interest? We identified a number of problems. Phenological phases occur earlier and they are shorter. There is an excessive impoverishment of the acidity and an increase in pH in the must, lack of alignment between technological ripening of a grape and the phenolic one, which is delayed, so to say, which means less alcohol, less color, poor aromas, or unpleasant aromas. We also have an increase in the dehydration, in the drying phenomena, in the berries, more CO2 in the air, which means more biomass production, an increase in the need for irrigation, and different pathogenic cycles and onset or arrival of new pathogens. So it is not simply that we want to voice disasters. This is what we find on a daily basis when we go out in the vineyards. In the light of this situation, we sought to try and analyze these aspects one by one and identify the techniques that, in an effective way, would limit at best the impact of climate change. We examined a series of aspects, be them agronomic and enological, and sought to mitigate these aspects. Specific objectives of the plan entail the making of techniques in farming that slow down technological ripening of grapes with a view to having a sustainable management of water and nutritional resources. In the winery, when you get a mass of grapes with altered features, well, there you have to find the right techniques to manage these grapes, which present some challenges. Now, the plan is organized, as you see there. There is cooperation, there are specific actions to implement the plan, and then there is dissemination and transfer of results and implementation of the EIP network. Now, if we focus on agronomic techniques which are innovative and which were identified by the scientific responsible people, the scientific experts, we have decided to go for 3 techniques which would be ready to be used. The first one is late pruning, which means that you prune after budding. Then you have green management and cowling at the canopy. And then in the winery, we use cold temperatures and inert gases, selected yeasts, and early harvesting of grapes. So these are the 3 or 6 rather techniques that we proposed to mitigate climate change. Results, outcomes. The 30.1 action entailed the test 1, and that was late pruning that was performed in Tebano. It is an organic vineyard. The variety Sangiovese Spurt Cordon is the system, the management system. And here you see the various phases. What does it mean to do a late pruning? We contrasted and compared the management that is normally performed in a farm with a pre-budding and post-budding pruning. So we used 3 rows, one next to the other, 300 meters each. Here you see date in the years 2017 and 2018 when treatment was performed. You possibly remember that 2017 was very dry and hot as a year, I mean. If we bring everything together, we see that in 2017 and in 2018, post-budding pruning delayed blossoming and veraison. And this is one of the reasons why we set up the technique. In terms of sugar accumulation, we had what we expected in that we had different climate conditions in the 2 years, and there was a difference therefore in sugar accumulation. And yet we had also good constant outcomes in terms of ripening. Here you have the numbers with the first point in the ripening curve that evidences that the technique was good. So we have also less production of potential alcohol or an impact on alcohol, and the phenolic framework was fine. In terms of production, well, there was no major differences between the samples or tests in terms of production or size and weight of the bunches. There was a slight difference in terms of the post-bud burst pruning. Then we had green management, canopy management techniques. There we kept the usual agronomic practices, and we had a late topping, trimming, and late trimming and modulated thinning of the leaves. Here we had a second test or experiment that was applied to the context of the same context, the area of Rimini, where again it was a spurred cordon. Here you see the 3 pictures of the 3 phenological stages of the vineyard. The phases did not produce a major impact because both late trimming and defoliation or thinning of the leaves were post-veraison. So the effects are certainly to be seen in the sugar accumulation, both in 2017 and 2018 and 16 also. The 2 interventions combined reduced soluble sugar at harvest. So we have figures testifying to that. It is the last point in the ripening curve. And the polyphenolic situation was good, in line with what the farm wanted. In terms of production, there was no significant difference. The only significant difference being that there was a difference in the pruning wood, with a slight increase in the case where we applied both interventions. And then we have kaolin, which provides a series of effects, including that of providing as a screen against solar radiation and avoid overheating for the plant. Kaolin, in this case, was tested in 3 different areas, 3 different environments in the area of Rimini, Ravenna, and Reggio. Lilla, Astro, and Gelosini are the names of the farms. different varieties, different planting systems, different features and characteristics. So we decided we would test kaolin in 3 different settings. So we continued the usual agronomic practices, but we applied kaolin, and then there was later defoliation or deleafage combined with control, and then kaolin and modular basic thinning of leaves. And also in that case, after thinning, we applied kaolin on the entire vegetative area, specifically focusing on the productive part of the plant. Here again, we have figures about individual farms and tests, which led to the observation that the result was always the same, meaning that applying kaolin in terms of sugar accumulation in the berry resulted to be lower when compared, the effect was lower when compared to the agronomic practice. So kaolin is effective in guaranteeing this useful ripening. Now, in all the 3 areas, this technique made it possible to obtain the same result. And if you need additional data, I will be more than happy to provide them to you.
L'ultima slide relativa.
This is the last slide concerning the tests that we ran out in the vineyards. So the results based on all 3 tests positively answered and corresponded to our objectives. In terms of winemaking techniques, we tested 3. Protection of the grapes with ice in combination with inert gas during picking and storage, and others. In terms of the first, which is low temperatures in combination with the protection with inert gas, the first important fact is the extraction of polyphenols that was possible, and the stability of color. We can notice it based on the on this index that indicates the color and the capacity of granting stability using dry ice for protection in combination with inert gas with levels that are much lower than conventionally. Generally, this test yielded a very positive response. Also in terms of sensory factors, the panelists who tasted the wines from this test were pretty much in agreement in defining this as a useful activity in order to obtain a quality product with an interesting aromatic profile. The other test that we carried out at the winery with grapes coming from the same companies that we had tested the agricultural techniques on was the use of selected yeasts, and in particular an experimental yeast, Candida zemplenina, which is a natural yeast that produces naturally very little alcohol. So in this case, we tested it on Trebbiano grapes. Candida zemplenina did not produce an alcohol content reduction to the level that we had expected, but it produced a number of positive effects, secondary effects, such as the production of glycerol, that also in sensory terms yielded a very good performance for those who tasted the wines. So Candida zemplenina gives this smoother, rounder wine. The last test that we carried out was the production of sour must, which is a particular technique which prescribed that grapes be collected at 6 to 5 bricks just before veraison. So this should be combined to the mustard normally produced during the harvest season, or added to the wine that would have been produced at the right time. In this case, the tests carried out with this addition of verjuice produced a reduction in the content of monomeric anthocyanins in wines that was more specific in the mix of wine and verjuice. The reduction in total alcohol was equal to 2% with a high concentration of residual sugar in the wine blend. So wine plus sour must and must from normal vinification, there was a result in terms of overall enjoyment, as you could see. From our point of view, the techniques that we have experimented with had been tested already in the past, but we decided to test them and popularize them and disseminate them in a more thorough way. And they achieved all the intended results, be it late pruning and trimming, as well as the application of kaolin, made it possible for the berries to constantly and consistently ripen while preserving the anthocyanin and total polyphenol level, which is what we're interested in. Also, the other techniques applied in terms of winemaking attained the objective that we had set ourselves. I'd like to warmly thank all the friends who participated in this exercise and who actively promoted this research. Professors Versari, Rambolà, and Ricci of Bologna, Dr. Masino Montevecchi from Unimore, Professor Lambri of the Catholic University of Piacenza, Simone Castellari of Astra, Tesserine and Donati of the CRPV. Thank you. Thank you. I hope it didn't take up too much time, but actually it's twice as much.
From Portugal, Dr. Silvestre, which will speak about the Geo Wine Climate Adapt, how to use genetic selection of varieties which may be able to resist to abiotic stresses. Thanks.
Good afternoon. I would like to start by thanking the CREA and the Rural Network for the opportunity for present here this operational group that intends to select and characterize the best suited grape varieties to climate change scenarios. The consortium is coordinated by INIAV. INIAV is a research institution from the Portuguese Ministry of Agriculture, and we have as partners Faculty of Science of University of Lisbon, Herdade do Esporão, one of the biggest wine producers in Portugal, Plancel Nursery, and the National Association of Grapevine Nurseries. So the problem that we have is Southern Europe is one of the world regions where climate change will be more pronounced. In particular, in Portugal, this problem is severe because in some regions, particularly in South Portugal, grapevine varieties in cultivation are already very close to their climatic limits. And the situation will go worse, as you can see with the predictions of viticultural index. UGVAN index will be increased. Dryness index will indicate an increase in water stress conditions. particularly in the interior at Alentejo. And we can see also a shift for warm nights in the south of the country. So we have an opportunity that is take advantage of the viticultural main adaptation tool, the genetic variability. In fact, grapevines have thousands of varieties and with different behaviors, and we intend to explore this. So our main objectives are elaborate an adaptability ranking of around 200 grapevine varieties, mainly in terms of resistance to abiotic stresses, but also in terms of phenology and tolerance to heat waves. Another objective is quantify the agronomic and oenological potential of grape varieties best suited to climate change scenarios. In terms of production, alcohol content, phenolic compounds, aroma precursors, as well as sensorial profile. And we have another objective is to identify molecular markers of tolerance to dryness and to heat in order to use in future selection works. For that, we have two experimental fields, one 40 kilometers north this one, the National Ampographic Collection, where we have 700 varieties. This is implanted in the deep clay soil without thermal and water stress. The second one is at the large ampographic field at Alentejo, Reguengos de Monsaraz, is the driest and hottest Portuguese region in a thin soil, and here we have three water regimes: rain feed, deficit irrigation, with and without sunscreen, in this case kaolin, and also full irrigation. So the main tasks are the quantification of the adaptability of grape varieties. It was starting last year and ends this year. And we are doing the phenological characterization, water use efficiency quantification, and its stress tolerance at varietal level. The main tools are isotopic composition, aerial thermography, and vegetation index. For the next 2 years, we proceed with the characterization of the agronomic and oenological behavior from the best adapted varieties. From the agronomic behavior, we go from the bud fertility until the maturation. We will proceed with phenological models and cultural models. Also, we will study the sensitivity of secondary metabolites to temperature, in particular anthocyanins, and odorant profiles of the wines. Also, we intend to provide data for molecular association studies. Another important task is the demonstration of techniques and results dissemination. And for the last year, we only applied these techniques for the clone discrimination. We have a year of results, and we have already concluded the ranking of resistances to heat waves. Since last year, we have a strong heat wave. And we are ongoing with phenological modeling because we have more than 10 years of data at National Ampographic Collection and 5 years of data at Sporão Ampographic Field. For characterized heat wave that we have last year, you can see that we have at the beginning of August 6 days with temperatures above 40 degrees, and also a very dry air with maximum vapor pressure deficit around 8 kilopascals is too severe. And with this, we have to make the characterization of the tolerance of the varieties in study at the sporal graphic field in both sides of the canopy, because the incidence of radiation is important to the sunburn. And this as a result, we have in white varieties, only 3 varieties were classified as extremely sensitive and 5 as very sensitive. 44% behave as extremely tolerant. Regarding the red varieties, there was an increase in the extremely sensitive and very sensitive varieties, and a reduction in the varieties classified as extremely tolerant. For curiosity, we have 4 rose varieties, and one stands out, the Amour pour Amour. In spite of its origin, North African, this variety was very sensitive to sunburn. In terms of the heat stress, water stress indicators, we are using 3 main tools: thermal imaging, vegetation index, and stabilized composition, in particular carbon-13. In this case, we are measuring carbon-13 in the phloem and berry sugars, because these give different times of integration. Berry sugars integrate the times between verizon and harvest. At phloem sugars integrate 1 to 2 days of time. With thermal imaging, we have a snapshot of the water use efficiency using canopy temperature as a proxy of stomatol conductance. This is an example of the vegetative index that we measure. And finally, an example of the maps of temperature that we obtain. The small point here is Candid in this point. And typically, we make 3 flights per day at mid-morning, solar noon, and mid-afternoon. And with that information, the difference temperature between canopy and air, we can construct heat maps for each variety. Thank you very much.
Thanks. So to gain a couple of seconds, I invite the second Portuguese speaker, Dr. Boetelho, which will speak about the GO in tensus vitis, also the low ecological impact and carbon zero. Please, Dr. Coelho.
Good evening to everyone. I would like to thank you to the organization for inviting us to present our operational group, which is Intensus Viti. And this operational group is funded by European funds. It's coordinated by Instituto Superior de Agronomia from the Lisbon University. And we have 8 partners. 6 of them are wine growers, and the other 2 are Wine Growers Association. Our first motivation for this project was the lack of hand labor for pruning that actually exists in Portugal, and the increasing costs of this hand labor. On the other hand, Portuguese viticulture has an average yield of 4.68 tons per hectare, which is very low. Of course, not every region have these kinds of yields, but in a general way, we are able to increase the yields because they are very low. Of course, these low yields are related to the low soil fertility. As a matter of fact, Portugal is one of the European Union countries that has a higher percentage of low quality soils. And one of the major reasons for this problem is the low organic matter content of soils. Since we are in the Mediterranean basin, we have as we all know, the heat coincides with the lack of rain. So we have low vegetation growth during winter and a high mineralization of organic matter during the summer. However, there are new organic amendments that are available for agriculture, namely those coming from human settlements, which are municipal solid waste composts and sewage sludge composts. Also, we have some increasing importance of some pests, namely mealybugs and Empuasca vitis, which is a leafhopper. And mealybugs are particularly enhanced by mechanical pruning, which is an issue that I will talk about. Besides from reducing costs and facing the lack of hand labor, we also are trying to reduce the ecological footprint of our grapes. The ecological footprint is a balance between footprint and the biocapacity, which, according to Global Footprint Network, it's the biosphere's ability to meet human demand for material consumption and waste disposal. So we are trying to increase biocapacity and in this way improve ecological footprint. By one side, we will try to increase soil organic matter content and in this way reduce the vineyard carbon footprint or even eliminate it. On the other hand, we want to increase yield, reducing carbon and ecological footprints of per kilogram of grape. We will also reduce the number of sprayings for disease control, namely Botrytis cinerea and pests, and the reduction of the support materials of the vineyard, stakes and wires, namely. We installed 8 trial fields along all the country. We cover 5 different wine regions, and we have different vine varieties. For example, in Quinta de Lourosa, we are talking about Loureiro, Quinta da Aroeira is Marcelin, Quinta do Gradil is Sauvignon Blanc. We also have Syrah, Fernão Pires, which is a Portuguese variety, José Maria da Fonseca, we have Trincadeira, and Toriga Nacional. We will compare hand pruning versus box pruning. The box pruning is a mechanical way to do pruning, and it will reduce the cost of pruning and the hand labor required for that operation. The major effect of box pruning, of mechanical pruning on the vine, on the grapevine, is the increase of the bud load per vine. When we are talking about hand pruning, we can have around 60,000 buds per hectare. It's what we are using. When we are talking about box pruning, the levels may raise more than 200,000 buds per hectare. Another factor that we are going to study in order to increase the soil organic matter content, it's the usage of new organic amendments, namely municipal solid waste compost and sewage sludge. And we will also test the soil tillage, namely we will test soil tillage versus green grass cover in order to see the effect on the organic matter content of the soil. We will use, in order to fight against the pests, we will use sexual confusion in mealybugs, and we will use precision viticulture for Empuasca vitis detection and optimizing the sprayings and the treatments against this pest. The assessments that we are going to do in the vineyard, apart from pest monitorization, we will assess the nutritional status of soil and plants with the soil and PCL analysis. We will assess leaf gas exchanges, pre-dawn leaf water potential, canopy structure, productivity, vigor and vegetative growth, grape composition, and finally, and maybe the most important, wine quality. The first results that I'm going to show you are from the first year of the trials, and since the organic amendments and the organic matter content of the soil takes more than 1 year to see some effects, I will only show you results from mechanical pruning in the next occasion, I will show you more about the soil. And the number of clusters per vine increased in all the trial fields. I am showing only 4 trial fields because the others were we were forming the vineyard for mechanical pruning. We were preparing the vineyard for mechanical pruning. So the number of clusters increased in almost all trial fields, with the exception of Vinhos Verdes, and that's because the hand pruning system had some canes, so the fertility was higher in those canes, and so the number of clusters per vine was equal between mechanical and manual pruning and hand pruning. But of course, mechanical pruning was much cheaper and faster to do. The cluster weight reduced. We had more clusters per vine, but the individual cluster weight was lower, as expected. And the yields per hectare increased in almost all trial fields. The increases were different between trial fields. And in Vinhos Verdes, we didn't have the increase because of that pruning, hand pruning that I told you. But we had on all the others, we had increases in yield. In terms of grape composition, when the yield increased more, we had a slight reduction of sugars in grapes. Basically, what happens is a delay in sugar accumulation. In Vinhos Verdes, we didn't have any difference. We didn't have differences in yield. And in Lisboa, even with an increase in yield, we had an increase in sugars in grape. The pH was not affected by the pruning system, nor the total acidity of grapes. So, as a conclusions from this first year, we can say that pruning box pruning allows a reduction in hand labor and an increase in productivity. When the increase in yield is not high, there is no delay in ripening, and in some cases it can even accelerate. When the yield increases is high, there was a delay in sugar accumulation. However, the other parameters were not affected. Total acidity and pH were not significantly affected by box pruning. And finally, what we see is that it's fundamental to adjust pruning, whether the system and the bud load, to the objectives of the production. If you want a high quality level wine, we can't have higher bud loads. On the other hand, if you want average quality wine to sell a lot of bottles, we need to increase bud load, and that's the cheapest way to increase yield. Thank you for your attention.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Botello, and thanks for staying at 10 minutes. We should have, should I switch to Italian? Cambio in italiano? Ci sarebbero due...
Mrs. Diti and Professor Rombola would like to take part in the discussion, but we're running late, aren't we? Just because of this last hour. So anyway, if you want to add just a very quick comment on what you do, feel free to do so. Just 1 minute or two. Keep it to 1 minute or two.
So you can sit down so the others can. Thank you very much. Prego, potete anche parlare direttamente lì al microfono.
Salve.
Hello, I'll keep this very short and hopefully it will be as effective. I have a quick comment concerning the activity of the operational group I represent, Bincapte, which is in charge of assessing the effectiveness of the vineyard ecosystem in carbon sequestration. One of the questions that I had been asked by the organizers was about the techniques that could prospectively help us manage vineyards sustainably.
Per essere un attimino più esatta sulla domanda, e come sequestratore di carbonio.
in terms of carbon sequestration. This is the objective. Now, these techniques are not innovative per se because they were already used in agriculture, the techniques that we use. What we do is that we assess the effectiveness in tilling, grassing, and soil management techniques such as sowing, artificial grassing, etc., comparing them. But they're seen from a different perspective now, from the perspective of their contribution to mitigating the effects of climate change, because in the literature, we have already many studies that consider grapevines as a crop because it is perennial, that produces biomass, and the biomass is given back to the soil. It is regarded as a crop that can fix CO2 from the atmosphere into the soil. At the university, ITER, CRPA, and the 5 companies involved in this activity, we try to understand how, as a function of the soil and the site where we work, we can improve the efficiency of the vineyard. This is our 2nd year, but we already have learned that also in the area of Piacenza, the effectiveness in carbon sequestration can change enormously depending on whether we are on poor soils, lean soils, or fertile soils. So that will going to take us to our final results, understanding the guidelines to be imparted will be site-specific, that will make it possible for us to understand in each individual vineyard, and that the grower and the research institute, what are the best techniques, because we shouldn't be believed that what we're doing now, like grassing or tillage, is the best technique for each individual vineyard. We hope that in 2 years, at the end of the project, we'll be able, for the next forum, to present our results, and we'll be able to hopefully write a guidelines on carbon sequestration for viticulturists. Thank you very much. I'll keep this very short. Our project has to do with carbon sequestration. It is a sister project to that was presented by Professor Nigro. We focused on canopy management in order to maximize the use of natural resources. And this is an important aspect of our project, and especially we'd like to manage the soil between rows and under the rows. We used in our rows a mix of self-regenerating leguminose, and in this fashion we managed, through research and experiments that we carried out in various sites, and in one in particular we reaped excellent results, to keep the grass cover all year round. And because we have self-seeding plants, and the plants die at a certain point in time because they are annual plants, they will stop eating nutrients from the ground, so there is no water consumption, for instance, no nutrient consumption, but they will create a layer that will protect the soil from evaporation. But then at the end of the summer, in September, the seeds that the plant will have naturally dropped on the ground will germinate again, and so the cycle will resume. And this is very important because it represents an extremely interesting tool also for companies that are not organic. No water is consumed, carbon dioxide is fixed into the ground, and because this is a leguminous plant, nitrogen from the atmosphere will be stored in the ground. The nitrogen addition is so high that despite the company in the control plots tries to take action to solve the problem associated with leaf color, they can't reach the same results no matter what they do. So up until now, we haven't experienced any problems with vigor. Just consider that the organic matter is very scarce in these soils. These are soils with crevices, and it's important to see what we have observed. I didn't emphasize aspects that had to do with the management of inter-row spaces, where we would sow these graminaceous and leguminous plants, and we observed that whenever these grass was growing, the grass would try to expand into under the rows. So that's all useful experience. Okay, this being said, I'd like to start the last session of the day, thanking the colleagues who presented their papers. And since EIP-AGRI has already spoken, I'd like to ask Filippo Godato to take the floor, sticking to the 10-minute slot allotted to him. I know Filippo, so I trust him to do a good job.
No, la presentazione non è quella che vedo, comunque io...
So we're about to talk about the body project. There it is. And I'm the director of a consortium, which is a farming cooperative of more than 10,000 farms, especially vine growers in Treviso, Vicenza, and Belluno provinces. We are the leading partner of an operational group financed under Measure 16 of in region Veneto. Here, you also listen to the intervention of a partner of ours. Then we have Radar Meteo, which is a company that analyzes and interprets weather data. Then CAPEC uses drones, and then we have as a partner for education, because the very important education dissemination part, which is called Diretti Veneto, the Association of Farmers of Veneto region, and another entity. So we mainly work to support farms for insurance coverage and several other plans. We also give a phytosanitary information service, which is sent every week to more than 6,000 members. So we use it to give indications about the management of treatments. We realized, though, that this newsletter was no longer sufficient in presenting the variability that you find in an area, even a small area, which is the province of Treviso, part of the province of Venice, and neighboring provinces. So we received several requests from our members who asked to transform all this into a more dynamic and less static instrument. So we wondered how we could make this instrument closer to what farms expected. We have therefore this bulletin, which is interesting and which is very detailed. It is a wide area, even though the vine growing area is specifically in the province of Trento. I will jump to the details about the fact that another problem is the fact that we already have a series of weather stations, 50 of them in the province of Trento. But if we consider more in detail and we zoom onto the province, we see that despite there are several stations, we realize that it was not good enough, and this is a picture that testifies to the fact that extreme weather phenomena are not properly recorded, because it might be that the weather station simply detects that there has been a lot of rain, or you're here 500 meters away from this and there is no rain at all. So this is the reason why we asked ourselves how we could use data recorded by means of remote sensing, and involved other meteo as a partner that interprets data. So now we have a detail down to 1 square kilometer. With the body project, we first and foremost sought to understand whether we could integrate physical stations with virtual stations, as we called them. That is data that we took from remote sensing and field detection data. And we have the objective of creating this network with a mesh of 1 square kilometer, which would be able to provide detailed information at this level. This amount of information then has to be made available to farmers, which is not that easy, of course, and we sought a decision-making support device, which I will not explain in detail, but I can tell you that our members that used these systems actually detected high costs and difficulties in a number of instances in implementing the input data and interpret the results of the system. We saw, therefore, that in terms of costs, we have, on average, a vineyard of 2.5 hectares, while the DSS professional systems entailed data calibrated for much larger farms of 30 hectares or so. So we are devising a method that exploits our physical weather system integrated with remote sensing. We managed to put into the system in a with a centralized management approach all the data that we receive, and we have a group of technical engineers who work at this and meet on a weekly basis. We create this DSS that gives information about downy mildew, botrytis, black rot, and we also have data about the weather, of course. So the farm can see the risk profile in terms of phytosanitary problems, and they can also simulate the situation. And this is integrated management. This is updated on an hourly basis. All weather information is provided on an hourly basis. The coverage and the persistence of the treatment based on what the farm entered as data, again, is updated every hour. This is our experience, and I'm about to conclude. Last year, 400 farms participated in the system from Veneto and Friuli Venezia Giulia. We aim at reaching 800 this year. It is the second year this year. Next year will be the third year. And I must say that it was very helpful to have measure 16. Using the EIP system helped us very much also in terms of the method of work and the reports to be made. So this was really helpful, and as a sort of guidance in making a business plan and organizing activity. Thank you very much for your attention. Well, thank you, Filippo, also for sticking to the time allotted to you, and thank you for being so clear. You're always very clear, as Mr. Zanotti said. And thank you for underlining the worth of EIP projects.
Another very important point, the flavescence doré, which is a terrible disease, which has to be under control. Please.
Unfortunately, my colleague Esmeraldina de Souza could not be present, and I will try to present here the operational group FD control that intends to contribute to mitigate the spreading of flavescence doré disease in vineyards. A bit of introduction about the factors influencing the control of pests and diseases. And mainly we can highlight 3 factors: the significant increase in international trade of plants and products that can origin the entry of avian pests. For example, we have now a recent focus, the first focus of Xylella fastidiosa at north of Portugal, at Porto, that was caused by importation of ornamental plants. The other factor is a drastic reduction in the number of active substances that we can use, and also the effects of climate change that can be noticed at the vegetative cycle of the plants, and can also changes in the life cycle of pests and diseases. So we need a continuous risk assessment to avoid introduction and spread of pests and diseases in order to eliminate or contain them. And we need prediction and early detection of infection foci in order to obtain a quick elimination of the infection, a decrease on the number of chemical treatments, and stop or limit the spread of pests or diseases, as well as protect the environment with eco-friendly tools for pests monitoring and control. So why FD control? Flavescence doré is a disease that affects the Portuguese Vinhos Verdes region at North Portugal. And this sector is economically relevant for the country. And this disease is, as you know, greatly reduces the income of producers and causes vineyard death. The problem is there are no curative treatments against flavescence, and since grapevine is a perennial plant, the costs for disease eradication are high. Also, the costs for replanting and re-entering in full production. So the main objectives of FD control are applying more efficient monitoring tools, make use of eco-friendly technologies, in the case of smart traps. Typically, we use digital cameras that are in the field and to connect the data 2 times per day and transmit to a center where artificial intelligence techniques are applied to develop algorithms that identify the positives and make the count of this. In particular, the insect vector, the Scaphoideus titanus. The second objective is evaluate the role that other host plants or other putative insect vector living in the borders of the vineyards have as infection foci or insect repositories. And finally, we have a third objective for identify and multiply the best regional combinations of rootstocks and variety in order to create disease barriers. At result level, we can highlight Scaphoideus titanus and Dictophara were present in the borders of the vineyards. Other specimens of putative vectors are under evaluation. A great abundance of Cicademis macropsis was also observed in all grapevine plots and borders. Alder yellow phytoplasm was detected in leaves and flowers of alder in 2 vineyards, and molecular characterization is ongoing. The list of weeds and other potential loss for phytoplasmas is ongoing, as well as the one for insect vectors on vineyards studied. We are also using complementary images obtained by drone for the characterization of the drones, of the borders of the vineyards. So, despite the treatments in grapevine plots, the existence of Scaphoideus specimens in the borders of the vineyards was confirmed. Regardless the significant presence of the Scaphoideus titanus vector inside the plots, these data indicate that the elimination of treatments may re-emerge this disease and those vines in a dangerous way. The reduction of treatments should be accompanied by the intensification of the monitoring. And these results reinforce the urgency of complying with compulsory cleanup of abandoned vineyards, as well as making treatments against Scaphoideus in the surroundings of the vineyards. And this is a consortium with INIAV and INESCTEC as research institutions. At Vilma is an association of protection, integrated protection, and the other are producers and also a nursery. Thank you for your attention.
Thanks. Thanks a lot for being so punctual. Last but not least, Daniele Bodesan della Fondazione MAC, che cura uno degli aspetti.
They work on very important aspects, also in the Veneto region, where as much as 30% of the vineyards, of the vines, use this retrieval irrigation system. But you also have to manage the nozzling system perfectly in order to avoid waste. Good evening. I come from the Edmund Mack Foundation Technology Transfer Center. I will introduce to you a project today where the leading partner is South Tyrol, the autonomous province of Bolzano. The project focused on reducing point-like pollution from pest control systems and PPPs, and that both in South Tyrol and Trentino. The point was to identify solutions that would be sustainable from an economic and environmental viewpoint for the cleaning and filling of sprayers. So in the phase before and after PPP treatment, plant protection products, and also prevention of point-like pollution from PPP. Here you have a map that tells you about the contamination of water in terms of PPP contamination at national level, actually would be at national level. But here you have a magnification of parts of Italy, and you see the provinces of Trento and Bolzano, where the situation is good. And yet we also have problems in the two provinces in specific areas. The partners, as I said, are from South Tyrol, meaning the Südtiroler Bauernbund, the leading partner of the operational group, then Benatusrenk, which is a consulting entity for fruit growing in South Tyrol. Then we have the Research Center of Limburg, the Edmund Mack Foundation, and farmers from South Tyrol, which group which also includes fruit growers. The features and characteristics of the farming area in Trentino and South Tyrol is similar. It is not that you have one main crop. You have vineyards and fruit orchards, especially apple orchards, plus berries and other fruit, for a total of 44,000 hectares and a very high number of farms and an average surface which is fairly limited for each farm, which tells about a high fragmentation of the areas to be sprayed and also the sprayers are present. This is, in a way, offset by a very strong cooperative spirit, whereby oftentimes solutions are found which entail that farmers group together into cooperatives. And it is not only production cooperatives. For instance, they have a mixing, a collective mixing system for or center for plant protection products. What we did was to have a series of meetings with farmers in order to identify their priorities and what they asked for the project. Specifically, 2 investigations were made, and I bring to you the results of this effort that entailed that more than 300 farmers filled in questionnaires. We understood that the average number of washing is 12 times per year. Number of treatments, it can also be much higher. In fruit growing, it can be twice as much. External washing, not only the internal washing, but also the external washing takes place rather frequently. So external 12 times a year, internal 9 times a year. We also ascertained that in general, farmers asked for a collective system that would perform the washing activity. So it seems that in general, 72% of farmers are interested in a collective washing facilities, provided that this is not too far from their plot, from their farm. The intention of the farmers was that of using this collective system at least 8 times a year. So this is what emerged from the questionnaire. We also analyzed the legal instruments and constraints that exist. The province of Trento and also the province of Bolzano actively interacted with the ministry in order to understand whether this type of approaches are compatible with collective management initiatives. Initially, negative opinions were expressed, but then recently the conclusion was made that if only external washing of the equipment is made, these are not waste disposal centers, but these centers can be considered as centers where water is recovered, because it is a closed circuit. Water is not discharged somewhere else, and the water is retrieved, recovered, decontaminated, and reused. We considered all present solutions, and what is envisaged in the current system is washing of the machines, and since it is so, we sought to identify solutions that could be integrated with into existing spraying systems with the tanks and external pumps or auxiliary tanks with clean water, or sprayers that would, as a model, have extra size, extra large tanks for internal and external washing purposes. And yet, based on the interviews that were made to farmers, we understood that 78% of farmers anyway tend to wash the machine at the farm, even though they could also wash the machine on the field, which once again testifies to the fact that people tend to manage washing in a number of settings. Then it is clear that it is not so that everybody will be able to benefit from collective washing facilities. We will always have remote plots or farms where people have to wash their own machines there, which is the reason why we are about to create both fixed and mobile platforms, so devices that you can move around and that can act as washing platforms and also as wastewater disposal systems. In addition to that, there are simple solutions. This is one of the biofilters that were made at Limburg, and that was actually made by a farmer. So in addition to that, we also have a number of devices which we have been testing for years now in order to identify advantages and possible negative aspects of a number of devices in order to create a series of descriptive sheets and have a systematic characterization of all machines and devices. In the research work, we identified several solutions that could be suitable for collective management. A number of farms already have collective systems that are very similar to what we propose. So we considered ultrafiltration, inverse osmosis, and clarifloculation, followed by filtering as collective systems. Other approaches and devices are being tested at the Edmund Mack Foundation. The same goes for additional experimental activity and data collection activity at Limburg. There is another activity that we are performing starting a number of weeks ago, and it is meetings with the farmers and technical experts who ask to know more about the possibility to have these collective facilities whereby they could join effort with the provincial agencies for the protection of the environment that formally are not involved in the working group, but which participate at the work tables we have both in the province of Bolzano and Trento. Yesterday, the director of an estate from our province asked for a meeting in order to talk about the possibility of setting up such a system. So here you see numerous guidelines, because there are several guidelines at European level on this topic. We intend to update those guidelines and make them more accessible to farmers in the province of Trento and Bolzano. This year, we knew about a washing facility for tanks for wine and must. So a producer from South Tyrol rented the facility. Of course, the water here is stored and will have then to be disposed of, properly at the end of the season. We will also consider there adopting one of the technologies, or rather they will consider adopting one of the technologies that we are testing and proposing. We have the intention, together with farmers and farming organizations, to organize visits in order to go and see places and centers and facilities which are similar to what we would like to do in our provinces and which are located elsewhere in Italy or in foreign countries. If you want to know more about these aspects and what we work at, please write directly to the coordinator of the project. You see the name and address on the slide. Thank you very much for your attention. I'm here if you have questions. Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you for explaining in such a detailed fashion what opportunities are given. Since we're in line with the time allotted, if Filippo Taglietti and Daniele Sarri are here, we still have 12 minutes to go. They might just close the event, summarizing the key concepts and conclusions, if you have any, of your operational group. I'm Daniele Sarri. I work at the University of Florence, Department of Agricultural Engineering. As part of our project, we have partnered with the Rufino winery. The other scientific partner is the CRIA of Arezzo. Our goal is to work on the spraying and applications of crop protection products. So that comes after the choice of machinery. We've seen models, different models of DSS and other strategies. We are concerned with field work. With our partners, we develop innovative sprayers that can optimize the distribution of crop protection products depending on the characteristics of the targets in various areas, the doses and volumes applied as a function of canopy development. Generally speaking, in the early stages of growth, there's a dispersion that can be as high as 80% under certain circumstances. And so we implement, and we've already started that part of the process with this season with an initial kit to adapt the volumes sprayed as a function of canopy development. At the end of the season, the new sensor should be produced that would help us better characterize the leaf surface in order to adapt in a site-specific and well-targeted way the spraying of products to meet the needs expressed in terms of sustainable use of crop protection products. This is an extremely summarized description of what we're going to do this year and next. I think you also thought of using robot systems. Well, not as part of this project. We'll be using a system that will not involve the use of mappings as there are for other contexts, but this is a system that we have a system that will measure leaf development on the go and proportionately in real time will adapt the spraying volumes. So optic sensors, yes. It's not an optic sensor, but it is essentially an ultrasound sensor with a specific rhythm that will reconstruct the leaf surface. Interesting. Thank you. Obviously, if you have any questions, feel free to ask them. We have 8 minutes at our disposal. I think there were a few microphones around, right? I don't know Filippo Taglietti, so I'm not sure if he's here. He's not here. So, too bad. He would have spoken on behalf of the operational group named Ithaca and about applications in heroic mountain viticulture, because especially in Conegliano and Val Dobbiadene, that kind of viticulture has developed quite intensely. Simona, what do you think? I think this is the end. We've been good with timing. So, in terms of the possible debate, since there aren't many people, and the people who are watching us can't ask questions, I think we could draw conclusions with questions. In case you want to then draw conclusions, feel free to do so. I don't know if the heroes here have questions. We are heroical.
Va bene, allora io chiuderei. Sì. Ringrazio tutti.
So this being the case, I'd like to thank all the speakers to this panel discussion, thanking everybody for the great quality of their contributions. So today we gave, we showed in a very evident way how big the contribution can be from the interactive models that we have described. We've given examples of partners of projects from the production, consulting, and research world that are already implementing this interactive model. What probably is missing in the whole process is having moments to share what's being done. The innovation broker is something that is done, but people are not even always aware that they are innovation brokers. Now, more people will be aware of their role after today. People who are working with this interactive model, because awareness is important. Awareness is important to do a better job. I particularly liked the presentations about the in-house work, about innovation of the operational groups of Emilia-Romagna with the bus, and with the identification in the various groups of the partners, and also the communications outside, and also the synergistic approach between research and the corporate world. There are always real-life implications that need to be communicated and perpetuated also across periods. So these innovations, which have been key to this InnoForum, was very successful in that we've kept talking about innovations in every respect. So that was a great conclusion for this 3-day event. Thank you very much for staying with us so late, and thank you to you for organizing the